The government remains partially shut down. American spy Paul Whelan is being called a spy. Is he really a spy? Elizabeth Warren has decided to announce an exploratory committee to run for president. That and much more with our all-star panel today on this edition of the Armstrong-Williams Show. Thank you for joining us. Fine as a lawyer and philosopher. What is this story on Paul Whelan? Is he a spy?
Well, we don't know. He's got 4 different passports. He's had kind of a checkered experience with the Marines. He got discharged with a dishonorable discharge, the problems with money, larceny. On the other hand, he says he was visiting Russia to attend a wedding. And there are experiences of a quid pro quo that comes on the heels of Marina Butina, who is pleaded guilty to not registering as a foreign agent with the Attorney General, so it could be kind of a spy swap arrangement that Russia has used now to try to get Maria Butina back, but she's probably going to be deported anyway. There's just a whole lot of gray area right now on that particular issue, whether he's a spy or whether or not it's really just retaliation because of our enforcement and expulsion of Russian spies.
John, what does it mean, Elizabeth Warren announcing an exploratory committee?
Well, 2020 is in full throw already, right? We're at the beginning of the year, and you're going to see a lot more people come in. I would keep an eye on Joe Biden, right? We're going to see what happens there. But I think why she's the first one out, a lot of people are going to focus their attention on the last time she ran something, and that was when she ran the Financial Services Oversight Board. And what sort of leadership style did she have there? What sort of problems she had? People forget, but that agency had a very bumpy start at its beginning, and it had a profound effect on the financial industry, which you see President Trump sort of reversing now a little bit. I think her tenure as a leader is going to get explored. She's the first one in, so everyone's going to have time to look at that. I think we're going to see a lot of focus on that agency and her leadership skills.
Larry Klayman, your client, Jerome Corsi, was at court this week. Very dismissive by the judge, by the way. I know you're going to spin it differently, and that's what I would expect. You're a lawyer. But what was the purpose of filing a $300 million lawsuit against Mueller in the Justice Department? What is the end game?
Well, the end game is to take the offense. You know, if you're playing offense, you know, it's better than defense because you keep other people on the defense. Now, Mueller has committed a lot of prosecutorial misconduct. There has been illegal surveillance of my client in violation of the 4th Amendment. He has leaked grand jury information, and it's time that someone pushed back. The president should have done this years ago. He's gotten bad advice, I believe, from his lawyers just to go along to get along. He's now literally in the cart going to the guillotine with Mueller. So Jerry Corsi said, no, I'm not going to lie, and I'm not going to get a sweetheart plea deal. I'm not going to roll over to this prosecutor. I'm going to not just represent myself. I'm going to represent the American people.
So why is Roger Stone attacking his friend now?
I don't know. I think we don't wish Roger any harm, but I think Roger's feeling desperate these days. He believes he's going to get indicted, and he's just kind of flailing about. So we don't say anything about that. We don't take a comment on that, and we don't wish Roger any harm.
You know, I found it interesting, John, this week when the president was with the Speaker of the House and the Minority Leader talking about the government shutdown, and he decided to talk about impeachment. And the Speaker of the House said, Mr. President, we're not here to talk about impeachment.
You see the Democrats in a significant way, at least the elders in the party, tamping down impeachment expectations with a young, energetic base.
Well, I saw your piece with Adam Schiff.
Adam Schiff yesterday
yes.
on our the TV show said flatly, I think if the president's leaving office, it's because voters are going to vote him out. It's not going to be because of impeachment. And this is a man that's read in the Russia program. Here is, I think, the problem for Mueller and the Democrats. There was such a large narrative built of expectation of what they would find in Russia, and the evidence, I don't think, matches that narrative. And so you're beginning to see the de-escalation of anticipation and of expectations going on. And I think President Trump's having a little fun with it. Hey, let's talk about that impeachment. How's that going? And I think he's poking at it a little bit to see as it goes into reversal these discussions.
So you're encouraged that he brought it up?
I'm not encouraged he's brought it up. I'm not surprised he brought it up. I think he feels he has the upper hand right now. You see Mueller's investigation beginning to wind down, at least as related to the collusion.
You think he has the upper hand?
The president has a lot of advantages. The bully pulpit is an extraordinarily powerful thing, and I think one of the things that we're all waiting for.
But does he have the upper hand?
Well, going up against a prosecutor, it's a tough challenge, right? He doesn't know what the prosecutor has, right? But I will say this. he has a series of documents that he's waiting for the right time to release. And
Bruce-
those are all the declassified documents. That's the thing I think he plays next.
Bruce, out of the corner of my eye, I can see you shaking your head. Why?
Because I don't think the president does have the upper hand. I think right now, I think he's just getting a new White House counsel. He's had difficulty attracting blue chip lawyers to defend himself. I think the crux is going to be when it comes to time to consider a subpoena to the president. The kinds of crimes, if you will, misconduct that Mueller's investigating depends very much upon the intent, the mental state of mind of the suspect, which is true in many, many crimes. Like the difference between first-degree murder and self-defense is the mental state of mind used when you're killing someone. And that's only going to be thoroughly investigated if there's a deposition of the president. And that, in my judgment, is going to be a constitutional crisis, especially because the new Attorney General nominee, Mr. Barr, has taken position on almost limitless executive power, and he might try to overrule an effort by Mr. Mueller to subpoena Mr. Trump. And then that does really get you into impeachment territory, if you will. Remember, you don't need a crime in order to impeach.
I respectfully disagree with Bruce. I don't think intent really matters because what Mueller's investigating, at least what we know of, aren't crimes. So what difference does it make whether you have intent or not?
Obstruction of
Russian-
justice is a crime.
There's no obstruction of justice because he had the right to fire Comey and he was correct to do it. So I don't understand where this is going other than the proverbial witch hunt. And that's exactly what my client Jerry Corsi's going through. They asked him to take a sweetheart plea deal that he would get no time if he would lie and testify against the president. He said, no, I can't do that in front of my creator, and I wouldn't ever do that to this president because, number one, I'm not going to plead and become a felon, won't be able to vote for the rest of my life, and I'm going to stand there for myself, and I'm going to stand there for the American people, I'm going to stand there for him. This whole thing is complete garbage, okay, and what we're going through, and it tells you where this country is today, that our Justice Department, as I said the other day to Judge Richard Leon, has become the Department of Injustice, my alma mater, and I'm sorry to see that.
I think that you need due process. I think it's quite premature. You've excluded a whole lots of other evidence as well, but that's why we have a process, so that all sides are heard and finally make a judgment based upon what the facts are rather than speculation.
I think Bruce's description of the subpoena is really the fulcrum here upon which this investigation rests. I think there's some evidence that Mueller may have had trouble getting a subpoena already, and here's why. He got one round of questions. President Trump's team defined what was on and off limits. Anything that happened during the presidency, you can't ask us about. He knows that's the president's position going forward, and he's back negotiating for more answers. It suggests to me that maybe behind the scenes he can't get that subpoena already because Mueller's a no-nonsense guy. I can't believe he stretched this out this long already. I would have thought by now he would have dropped a subpoena.
Well, the reason I think is as a matter of law and in going the decisions, the court wants to know that the prosecutor used all alternate mechanisms before he went to the subpoena. So that's why he wants to go to the 11th step, if you will, say we've tried every other way to do this before he issues a subpoena. That's why he's waiting. He wants to make it clear he had nothing else to do.
Can we fairly conclude that Trump's lieutenants like Mattis, Cohen, and others put him in this predicament, and they're going to serve time?
What predicament?
Mattis? I don't think Mattis has put him in a predicament at all. Jim Mattis, the Secretary of Defense?
No. Well, Mattis, I don't know if you read his op-ed. He had some pretty harsh things to say about the president.
Yeah, not impeachable offenses, that's for sure.
No, but I'm going somewhere with this. Are all the president's men going to pay a price for this investigation, and the president will be left unscathed?
Well, I wouldn't say all the president's men. What usually happens,
they are his men.
You know, I've been in this game
Cohen
now
is his
for
guy.
25 to 30.
No matter how much he tries to distance himself from Cohen, that's his guy.
25 to 30 years I've been a public advocate, in effect, at Judicial Watch and now Freedom Watch and in my private capacity. And what usually happens in Washington, they pick low-hanging fruit, they burn that person, you know, like Scooter Libby in that matter, and they leave the higher-ups alone, whether it's Democrat or Republican. There's an unwritten rule here in Washington that the elite establishments will march on, and they'll pick somebody at a lower level, and that'll be it. That'll be the sacrificial lamb. I don't believe anything is going to happen to the president, but what they're trying to do is weaken him for the 2020 elections because both establishments want to run their candidates. We see Mitt Romney positioning himself this week, despicably I might add, to try to take the president on. And that's what it's about. But the president will never do any time, and there may be a few people at a medium and lower level that do. They already have. They're going to be doing some time.
I think that's not an accurate description of what happened in Nixon and the Watergate. Not only did the president's men, Haldeman, Ehrlichman, Mitchell, they served time. The president himself, if he wasn't pardoned, was vulnerable to prosecution by Leon Jaworski. It just shows that facts matter. And so you can't judge in a generic way, well, it'll come out and the president will be unscathed or not. That's what makes justice. It's got to turn on facts.
We're going to take a break. We're going to take a break. But, you know, when we come back, we're going to talk about HUD and the Department of Education, what's really going on with the enforcement of civil rights and the race-neutral laws. While all this, we talk about the president, there's some significant things that's going on with Ms. DeVos and Secretary Carson. And I must tell you, if I could have put Listerine in Congressman Tlaib's mouth when she was talking that way with her son, I just literally would have cleaned her mouth out. I thought it was just really pathetic. I mean, it's just shocking. And the president wasn't any better in the White House with Pelosi, but yet the cameras were not rolling. I guess it's a different standard when the president does it and Tlaib does it. We're going to talk about that when we come back on this edition of the Armstrong Williams Show.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
You know, Secretary Carson and Secretary Betsy DeVos has really, under the radar screen, has been doing some revolutionary things in the area of enforcement of civil rights and dealing with these race-neutral policies, Bruce.
Yeah, I don't know whether I'd call them revolutionary. That's
that's what the liberals call it.
Well, of course, the liberals call it because they took statutes that prohibited intentional, purposeful racial discrimination and said, well, that's not good enough. That's the constitutional standard. We'll go beyond that, and any policy that has a disparate impact on a particular group can become illegal. And most policies have disparate impacts on all sorts of groups. And so what is happening is that the agencies, not limited just to education and housing, are examining regulations issued that go beyond the statutes and reach far into regular practices that are race neutral on their face but impact groups differently, saying no, that is not the proper implementation of the statute. We're vigorously enforce intentional, purposeful discrimination, which can be based on circumstantial evidence. It doesn't mean you have to use the N-word in order to be liable. And we're going to follow the law rather than to make our own policy.
You know, John, the president's nominated Attorney General is in the news, who's a fierce executive power advocate. Will he be confirmed soon? Do you think the nomination is in trouble?
I think he'll eventually get confirmed, but I think you're going to see a pretty aggressive vetting process. And I think the question that Bruce raised early on is the question. This is a man who believes very strongly. He's in that Dick Cheney camp of very strong executive powers. And there are going to be some conservative and libertarian Republicans that are going to have questions for him. There are going to be a lot of Democrats here. That said, I think he has that sort of adult stature that everybody's craving for at the Justice Department right now. And my gut tells me, barring a very significant revelation, that he probably will get confirmed, but it will raise a very healthy dialogue about where the powers of the presidency begin and end, and I think that's good for the country.
Larry, what about the exchange about facts between Secretary Christian Nielsen at Homeland Security and the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi?
Well, I feel sorry for Kristen Nielsen. No one ever gives her respect. It's kind of like Rodney Dangerfield. I ain't got no respect. She seems like she's a very competent, nice
Was she
woman.
factual?
Yeah, I mean, that was disrespectful. And the more Pelosi speaks, and the more you have the Adam Schiffs and the Gerald Nadlers and the Maxine Waters of the world out there being disrespectful, it works to the advantage of the president. I'm not sure it works to the advantage of the Republican Party, which is effectively flamed out in the House of Representatives. They were thrown out on their duff. But it will help the president because these people are out of control. They want his throat. They want him legally dead. And this disrespect towards a nice woman who actually is competent is really piling on, particularly against a woman. It doesn't look good.
You know, Pelosi does a very good job at keeping her left-wing extremists in check and clamping down, like we mentioned earlier, on impeachment. She's very disciplined, very focused, and she understands her role. How best for this president to work with Pelosi, John, and what are her strengths that will give this president problems in the new House?
Well, let's remember that Barack Obama couldn't get Obamacare through if it wasn't for Nancy Pelosi. She created a whip operation to get that law through, and it's really an extraordinary, whether you agree with the law or not, her actions in the leadership of Congress were really an extraordinary effort at pulling together a circus and getting something done. If I'm the president, I look for areas, if I want to get some progress done before I run for re-election, I look for areas where there's going to be some common ground. I think infrastructure, the White House is signaling that Pelosi, Schumer, and the president can find common ground in infrastructure, and that could be one of those bipartisan moments like we just saw at the end of the last Congress with criminal justice reform. I think you're going to see some places, if the president wants to get a track record going into 2020, he should engage and get things done for the country. Infrastructure is a good place. The wall is going to be a tough one, right? I think you're going to see a pivot by the president. I don't think they'll get the sort of deal the president wants, and you're going to have to pivot somewhere else. Maybe it's with drug enforcement funds, arguing that the opioid crisis is being affected by the border. But I think the president's going to have to get his wall through other means. But there are places where Pelosi and Schumer and McConnell and the president can get things done if they choose.
You don't think the president is going to get his wall? Or do you think he's going to get a portion of them funding for the wall, Bruce?
Well, he'll call whatever he has a wall.
No,
and the other
doesn't
side
want to
may
use
call it a
shutdown. He
fence.
wants to call it a strike.
Well, whatever he wants to use, he can make a compromise. It doesn't have to be $5.6 billion. It could be $4 billion or whatever. There's obviously the ways in which you can have enough funds to call something a wall and claim it's a political success without getting the full 5 point whatever it is. But I do want to go back to one of the things that John said earlier, and I apologize here, going back to the Attorney General. One of the things that's important in getting the confirmation will be efforts by the Senate to get Mr. Barr to make promises that he will handle Mr. Mueller in a certain way. That's what happened in Watergate, where Elliot Richardson was told, if you want to be confirmed as Attorney General, there has to be a special prosecutor. His name's going to be Archibald Cox, and this is going to be his regulations. And I think that could be very key here in determining the fate of the president, is whether or not the Senate Judiciary Committee is going to give him de facto, whether he has a law, the kind of security that he needs, that he can go forward fully investigate, including subpoenas, without feeling that he'll be interfered with. And then the last observation about Nancy Pelosi. She does not have the same strength of power that she had earlier in 2006.
Yeah,
the Democrats are far more divided. She didn't even renounce that expletive that was uttered against Mr. Trump by a junior. No, she said, I wouldn't do it, but she says, I'm not a policeman of free speech. She did not, and she didn't threaten any kind of retaliation. I don't think that she's going to
be censored
by the House that has the authority to censor because they make rules, or you could have a reprimand, something of that sort. But my general observation is I don't think that Pelosi will be able to deliver as easily as, say, she did earlier with Obamacare.
Yeah, that's true.
And we've got Paul Ryan. If you look at the new rules that were created the first week, they decentralize the power. Yep. They remove authority from the Speaker. So it's good to have good relations with Pelosi, but I don't think she's going to be able necessarily to deliver a majority.
Where
of
are we with Mark Harris and the North Carolina election, which Democrats are launching an investigation into?
Well, the fact is, under the Constitution, the House of Representatives itself has the final say on who was the valid winner. Steny Hoyer, the majority, says, hey, we're not going to accept this election. The evidence of manipulation of absentee ballots is already good enough for us to say, we wouldn't accept it. So even if court proceedings ultimately come out in favor of Mr. Harris in North Carolina, the Democrats in the House will say, so what? We are going to be the final decision makers, and I suggest it's going to go back and there's going to be a rerun.
Armstrong, let me make a prediction.
No, not just yet. Is the economy going to tank on the president?
Well, it's going to tank if, in fact, this instability with regard to impeachment, potential impeachment, the instability dealing with Congress and everything else. I think this is what has caused, in large part, there are other factors, interest rates and things like that, the decline of the stock market recently. And having this hanging over the president's head, the viciousness, the nastiness, no one knows what's going to come next. But let me make a prediction, is that I think Nancy Pelosi in 2019 will get into her own scandal. Someone will dig something up. She deals with a lot of money. If you want to push on the president on campaign finance, you can probably find all kinds of stuff on her. Because I don't think you can deal with her. I don't believe that the president's going to be able to reach any deals with her that matter in any respect. And they're going to try to neutralize her the way they're trying to neutralize the president.
Armstrong, I think the greatest economic risk is the trade war with China, which could really mushroom. We already see some of the plunging in the stock market as a reaction to announcements by Apple. A lot of U.S. companies have a huge portion of their profits dependent upon open trade, if you will, with China. And we don't know how long this trade war is going to continue, whether to escalate or whether it ultimately results in lower barriers. But I think that's the greatest economic risk that Trump confronts at present.
Listen, I can't thank all of you pros enough for taking the time to come join us today for this edition of the Armstrong Williams Show. When we come back, Bruce is going to remain. We're going to delve in this thing we call mathematics. John Solomon, you have a Twitter feed?
I do. Jay Solomon Reports.
Larry?
FreedomWatchUSA.org and LarryKlayman.com.
We'll be back with John D. Long and Blake Allison and much more on this edition of the Armstrong Williams Show. Often people address issues of life as to why they cannot realize the American dream, why they can't balance their checkbook, why they can't write a check, how they don't know how to tip, they don't know how to grocery shop. And all these things involve math, because mathematics makes our life orderly, very orderly, and it prevents chaos. I don't think people understand that. It prevents your life from having chaos. And certain qualities, that is nurtured by mathematics in my life is the power of reasoning, creativity, abstract or spatial thinking. All those things are associated with math. Even the critical thinking and the problem solving and the ability to even effectively communicate. And so I was having a conversation with someone I have a lot of respect for, John D. Long, who's joining us, about math and the role that it plays. And if people can master math, how it could bring order, civility, and real self-confidence to their lives.
Well, I enjoy mathematics immensely. It's having a really powerful force for good in my life. And to speak to your points, I think first and foremost, mathematics provides you with a unique perspective upon nature and the world. One that emphasizes pattern recognition, discovering principles and rules, and this is a path to order. And when you begin to see a certain structure in the world around you, you find a certain structure within yourself that is valuable. Now, I don't think any particular ethics comes out of mathematics, but it does lead one towards ethical perspectives that emphasize a certain order or a certain optimism about the ability to discover things in reality.
Is math moral, Bruce?
Well, I don't think it is moral. It can be manipulated. Mark Twain once said there are three kinds of lies: lies, damn lies, and statistics. I remember Robert McNamara, our defense secretary under President Kennedy, returning from Vietnam and saying, by all quantitative measures, we have won the war. We obviously didn't. So mathematics, you can have geniuses who can they build rockets, but you can shoot rockets from Netherlands into Great Britain in World War II. You can do things that are marvelously beneficial to mankind, but very terrible things as well can come from mathematics. Look at what it contributed at Alamogordo. We exploded the atomic weapons. You can use them to bring peace, if you will, war, and you can use them to devastate communities. And I think that's why, and Bertrand Russell was a famous mathematician too, and he understood math by itself can be used for good or bad. It depends upon a philosophical content that transcends numbers. You know, why do we exist? What is the nature of virtue that enables us to enlist math for positive, beneficent reasons rather than for malignant ones?
Blake?
So I take a very different perspective on this, where I agree with what has been said already about the power of mathematics and bringing order, things like that. My world, we help people improve their financial health and well-being, help people build wealth. And the idea of economics is that people make decisions rationally. But the problem is people are humans and we don't always make rational decisions. And so there is this tension between mathematics and the power of mathematics and bringing order and logic and reason, and we can make good decisions, but then the humanness of us, where we make decisions emotionally, is really kind of what weakens the mathematical power. So we all know that we need to save X dollars per month towards retirement, but we're not doing it. So we understand the math. We understand that we need to save $100 a month, but we don't do it, not because we don't understand the math behind it, but because we kind of lack that emotional discipline.
Do you think people really understand the power of the math and the significance that it plays in your life? Because it is the one thing that consistently brings about logic and common sense. Because math is not emotional.
I think a lot of times it's not taught in a way that emphasizes that enough. I think a lot of times school systems, depending upon the populations they serve and the goals they have for those populations, tend to teach mathematics more like it's an accounting class, right? So teaching people how to write a check, how to balance their checkbook. And I think they believe they don't have the luxury to teach their students the greater beauty of mathematics and how it relates to nature and how it relates to this more abstract endeavor of pattern finding, which I think is ultimately at the high school level the perspective you need to take if you want to create scientists and engineers. But if you want to create people that are just kind of competent in household finances, they feel like you got to take the more the accounting approach. Because the complaint I always hear from kids is basically that I don't like math because it's just the numbers and it's just doing arithmetic and I find it boring.
Why does math lag so far behind? Why does technology and science lag so far behind math, Bruce?
I don't know whether it lags behind math. I mean, to some extent, the technology is becoming a substitute for math. I mean, when I was going through and learning
Can technology
mathematics,
become a substitute for math?
Sure, they press the button on your calculator and you don't do the calculation anymore. You don't do multiplication anymore. You just go on your electronic calculator and push in numbers. So that diminishes the amount of intellectual focus. You have to know, how do you do addition? How do you do multiplication? How does it work? Binomial equations? I don't solve that. I just press a button and it gives me the answer. So I think that is one of the things that diminishes an appreciation for the power of math, because it's just given to you on a platter. You don't have to put any intellectual exercise and energy into mastering the particular problem that you're trying to solve. And I do think that it does undercut an appreciation of the logic that you're able to see if you're doing longhand division, or even if you're doing abacus or something like that, as opposed to today, everything is push button. And that's not something that's healthy for intellectual rigor.
But don't you think, though, the individual has to know how to set up those problems, put the inputs into the calculator, for instance, to have that logic and reason, to be able to create that equation that they put in the calculator? I don't disagree that longhand you have to think through a different dimension, but the actual problem setup and before you put the numbers in the calculator has to be there, and so you have to have that background, that basis.
Well, to build in the program, yes. And I mean, there's a minimal amount of understanding, but anybody who uses the calculator does it because it's a lot easier. That's why you do it as opposed to regular mathematics. But that doesn't mean that it's more helpful to developing intellectual rigor.
And you also have to understand,
you're not learning.
Yeah, you're not learning.
You have to also understand the outputs.
Yeah.
You know, you can put in an output and say, oh, if I put in $100 every month and it's going to grow to this amount of money over time, how do I evaluate, is that a good number or a bad number? So there's this larger context, this larger ecosystem that you have to understand how an output relates to the goal or objective you're trying to achieve.
Hold that point. I'm Armstrong Williams, Blake Allison, John Long, and Bruce Fine are our guests, and we'll be back. So, John, who continues the incredible breakthroughs from the days of the Babylonians in the 1900s, or the Greeks, or Galileo, or even Sir Isaac Newton? Who are they today?
Oh, I mean, it's an incredible period for mathematics now. I mean, the number of mathematical institutes across the world, the number of journals, the number of publications. I mean, mathematics, if anything, a lot of times we don't know their names because there's just so many of them, you know, throughout human history. Pythagoras, Galileo, Newton, Euler, you know, there were these greats, but there was a fairly small number of them. I mean, there's a ton of hardworking, brilliant mathematicians right now creating incredible contributions to everything from cryptography, which is a very, people know the word cryptography, that's very advanced mathematics, to aspects of algebraic topology that is relating to how we think of high-dimensional spaces, which ties into physics. It's an incredible time for mathematics now.
So why is math not making the advancement in solving many of the medical crises that the world faces?
I don't think math necessarily is going to give an answer to medical crisis. In fact, a huge portion of the medical problems we confront are just not following things that, you know, a grade school person would know about: eating healthy, getting enough sleep, not abusing your body.
You don't think math is critical to the research?
Oh, I'm sure it is, but I'm talking about a crisis, and it's surely true that math probably can maybe enable cures for very rare diseases. I don't know whether they're probably involved in gene splicing and all sorts of things. I'm sure it has a contribution to make, but I don't think that we want to exaggerate, you know, how much math can impact the general medical ailments that the species confronts. Just, for example, obesity. It's a huge problem. It contributes to endless amount
Weight is
of
all
medical
about math.
problems. Well,
It's all about the numbers.
but we don't have to solve anything. You're exactly right. It's all about math. If you actually absorb more calories than you expend, you're going to get fat. It's simple, but it's the willpower that you're talking about that's critical here. We know what the math equation is.
John, do you agree with Bruce?
Well, yeah, mostly. I mean, I think, though, that there's a deep connection between mathematics and science, which relates to the idea of a model, right? When people go to cure a disease, now your point about obesity is well taken. There's a lot of social health problems that go back to psychological problems. But when you say have currently incurable diseases, I think where math and science come together is in the form of a model, whereas mathematics takes the initial data that came with the observation that resulted in a model and then goes off to abstract it. Science then refines the model through collecting more data, getting more insight, and there's a sense in which a cure for a disease is the completion of a model, right? It shows a certain understanding, or if you just get lucky and come up with penicillin. Right. So there's a sense in which math and science work in the context of the ideas that motivate research, and there's contributions to be made there, but like Bruce is saying, there's a lot that can be done at the personal level in terms of health.
Blake, where is the diversity in research in Simi Valley, at NIH, at these institutes? Is it that the poor doesn't have the proper training and the investment for them to compete with the typical profile of what these researchers look like? I know that's something that you've placed an emphasis on with Life Sense.
So it's an interesting question, because I think going back to your earlier question about where's mathematics showing up, and I mean, I think there are things that people might relate more to if we think about algorithms that run, let's say, the Google search. Everyone uses Google search or some type of search engine. You know, someone is creating those algorithms that are mathematic based that help get the right information to you at the right time, and so the application and use of mathematics, I think, is much broader than people realize. And if we think about the application of mathematics in solving healthcare problems,
but you're not addressing the diversity issue.
I'll get there. The technologies that are being created to help solve medical issues. So the technology in mathematics is being used in a lot of different ways, but I think it's the same problem with STEM. It's where, where is the emphasis? I think broadly, there's not a lot of diversity in STEM, the science, technology, engineering, and math.
So where is the diversity?
Well, I mean, I think that's why there's such a focus on this right now.
No. You said there's not a lot of diversity in STEM, so tell us where the diversity is there.
I think that's where the focus is now, is to build that diversity. There is not only is STEM lagging as far as broadly people getting degrees, let's say advanced degrees in STEM subjects: science, technology, engineering, and math. So there's a push to get more people into those tracks. Along with that is the need to increase diversity, much as there's a need to increase diversity in higher education.
John,
generally.
where are the women? Where are the minorities? They're not there. Why?
Yeah, well, I think the reasons that women are not as represented in science is different a little bit from minority representation in science, because to your point, a lot of times the poor people are the minorities. And to speak to that point, I think there is a lot of times a well-intentioned utilitarianism, right? Where the idea is kind of, if I already have a bunch of kids that come from a working class or middle class family, you know, we can teach them more abstract mathematics or scientific principles to get them to that next level on the social rung. Whereas people that are in very poor environments, a lot of times the educational system takes its mission to bring them up to the level of the working class and the middle class. So there, mathematics and science are taught at much more like practical levels from the beginning, and that's not going to get you to the high levels of science.
It's
you
no
have to be
different than
taught
any topic,
abstraction.
any subject. Where we need greater diversity in all subjects. Mathematics happens to be one, but you know, to this point where it's diversity is lacking in higher education, and so when you have school districts that lack resources to provide great education for the kids they represent, mathematics is going to be one of the subjects that gets thrown under the bus. No pun intended.
Bruce?
Well, I think that the absence of diversity reflects, I think, historical vestiges of discrimination. When you grow up, you oftentimes decide to emulate the pursuits that your parents had or their friends had. And if your parents aren't exposed and they aren't exposed to those who are at Silicon Valley or at NIH, you're just going to be less interested in it. My view also is that your real enthusiasm, your emotional enthusiasm for the for math or any other subject that brings you to a high level is something that requires a father or a mother, a friend, to have a reward that comes not just because you scored high on the tables, but because they appreciate and they love you for it, and so that gives you that extra incentive to be ambitious.
You know,
and I don't know how it's just a huge problem because historically we have been flagrant in discrimination.
Listen, we have a strong gene in our family when it comes to math, and I don't know if you guys know anything about NOVA. And I was exposed to that when I was young, and it made a huge difference. Where are those programs now?
Yeah, I mean, they're all over the web still, but I definitely remember that series as well in high school, seeing the kind of 90s computer graphics and like, look at this plant and showing, oh, the Fibonacci series. And, you know, and it really got into that, or inspired in me that connection between nature and the idealized beauty of mathematics. And I think that approach is really powerful, and I'd like to see more of that in school, and I hope it's being done broadly.
I want to thank all of you for joining us today. Blake, do you have a Twitter handle? Website?
So website, lifesense.com.
CNTS?
Yes, sir.
Because I don't want them to spell it S-E-N-S-E.
Thanks, sir.
Okay, Bruce?
Bruce Fine Esquire.
Yeah, and John Long at Quake Technologies. You can find us at Quake, QWAKE.tech.
Well, listen, thank you. When we come back, you know, little notice, it should have got much more attention. Prison reform was passed and signed by the president late December. And Amisha Cross and our guests are going to join us to update us on the significance, which could be the most significant legislation in the last 10 or 15 years, especially for minorities across the country. We'll be back. She's the Director of State Policy for the Pre-Trial Institute, and you'll be seeing her more on the South Sinclair Broadcast Group and the Howard Stern Holdings platform in the future. Congratulations. Ronnie Lampert is the Criminal Justice Task Force Director of the American Legislative Exchange Council. And last but certainly not least, John Kufos is the National Director of the Reentry Initiative. So this is a big deal. Criminal Justice Reform Bill passed. Why is it so significant?
It's extremely significant because we have been building on, and the nation has been working towards trying to find a resolution to mass incarceration for a very long time. over the past decade, we've seen just what the cost is, not only in terms of states, but also at the federal level, in terms of housing individuals who, by and large, are not individuals who are a threat to society. It's not protecting public safety. These are individuals who were locked up in the prison expansion complex, basically through the Clinton crime bill. We saw a lot of that happen, and it affected minority communities the strongest. But at this point in history, we're now looking at folks who understand what that crime bill actually meant, what the offset effects are for mass incarceration, and we're at a stage where people wanted to see change.
Ronnie, you know, it's almost crazy that it would take so long. And you had such vociferous support on both sides of the aisle.
This was amazing. You had over 80 senators on both sides of the aisle supporting this measure and supporting these series of measures and series of reforms. This is an instance where in times of serious, severe polarization, you had Congress come together and say, for once during this seemingly past 2 years, say, we're a happy family, and pass legislation that improves the lives of all Americans, and it enhances public safety. And that's been proven to, and it's been proven to enhance public safety at the state level. This was an example of the federal government drawing from the states and seeing the successes at the state level and passing legislation that's good for all Americans.
So, John, tell a family who's still getting the information about this criminal justice reform how it can really impact them.
So a couple of ways. The first way is the law changed the good time credit statute. So the BOP, Bureau of Prisons, had always calculated the 54 days you're supposed to get is only 47 days. So it's a simple mathematical calculation right there. But the biggest thing we're seeing is changes to the crack cocaine sentencing disparity. And there's a story that just came up of Matthew Charles. If you're familiar with Matthew Charles, I think he's from Tennessee or somewhere out there. The guy served a term, got out, was doing everything he could do to be a model citizen, not a model returning citizen, a model citizen. And the appellate court reinstated his sentence, essentially on technicalities. This guy went back to serve about a decade or so more. He's in his 50s. Thanks to the First Step Act, Matthew Charles is now home. So what happens is he was permitted to correct what we talked about in the Clinton crime bill, to correct that error that destroyed minority communities.
What impact will this have on the prison population, Amisha?
A very sizable reduction. Because this act will actually ensure that those who had received a lot harsher sentences, again, based largely upon crack versus powder cocaine measures, now we're going to see that get turned around, turned on its head.
How do we, Ronnie, make sure that people, when they are released from prison, they have little or no chance of returning?
Well, that actually starts in the prisons, and this bill, what this bill does is that it provides for very, very robust reentry programs, and that's really, reentry should start on day one. As soon as a person goes into the system, that a reentry program and a reentry plan, no matter the length of the sentence, starts, and that person is provided with education, job training, substance abuse counseling. Once an individual has that, that's how you prevent someone from recidivating. Because once a person goes through the system, without those programs, it's very difficult for that person to come out and not recidivate. But if you start on day one, when the person goes into the system, and provide those programs and give the person the opportunity to better themselves, it's remarkable how that has reduced recidivism rates in the states.
It's like diagnosing. I really like how you put that, right? So think if you went into a hospital, Armstrong, and nobody diagnosed what your problem was, and then they said, well, just go out there and walk, right? So the idea is what a risk and needs assessment will do is diagnose this problem so you can have tailored treatment plans to fix the issues.
It's also one of the most foundational aspects of the bill. One of the issues that happens across states that we see when people try to pass bills that are reform-oriented around criminal justice is that they lack the insight into how to prevent recidivism. And a lot of that is ensuring that there is going to be job availability and access, that there are going to be training programs, that we will get rid of some of the barriers that have been created for those who have been previously incarcerated.
How does it address the opioid crisis?
This bill addresses the opioid crisis by providing for substance abuse treatment programs and for prioritizing treatment over incarceration for certain offenders, because there are some sentencing reform provisions in the bill. For example, there is a Justice Safety Valve Act that is modeled actually after the Justice Safety Valve Act that the state of Oklahoma passed in 2015. And what it does is it allows for a judge to say, well, this person's kind of a low-level drug offender. They're better suited for by having treatment. And because this bill provides for funding for those reentry programs and funding for those treatment programs, it certainly helps address the opioid crisis in that manner.
And it also, in addition to all of that, one of the sort of parts that's buried in the back is that it commands the Department of Justice to take a survey of all the current medication-assisted treatment programs they have for opioids right now, right? And then to prioritize their expansion. So it's really good, as Ronnie said, the interventions are helping develop the programs, but it's also commanding the DOJ through the Bureau of Prisons to take stock, say, what do we have, what do we need, and how do we get there, and to produce that report to Congress.
Is this a display of how politics and Hollywood can work as a force for the greater good?
Absolutely. I don't think that anyone can deny that without the push of a Kim Kardashian, without the push of Van Jones, without the push of those who had these bigger names, that this would have come out, and it would have come out as in full force as it was. I think that it did take someone who had that level of recognition because it made individuals understand, but also pinpointed exactly what some of these issues are. I also believe that around the drug addiction issues in and of themselves, more and more of the research has come out to point to the fact that we have, 60-70% at this point of folks who've been incarcerated who have significant substance abuse issues. And treatment is going to be something that they need over incarceration.
Are there any things about the bill that concerns you that make you want to pause?
Certainly, the danger has always been is that, the Clinton crime bill, as Amisha talked about, went too far in locking too many people up, and too many people got swept up into these massive drug conspiracies. Certainly, the concern among the public, not necessarily shared by me, but the concern is that, well, we're letting too many people out of prison now. This is soft on crime, but as states have proven time and again, this is not a bill that is soft on crime. This is a very modest step in the right direction, because of the treatment programs, because of the modest sentencing reforms. So there's nothing in this bill that really concerns me, but of course the concern of the public and from the opposition you heard was that this is soft on crime, crime rate's going to go up. But as states like Texas, Georgia, and Oklahoma have proven, this bill, these laws do not cause the crime rate to go up. If anything, the crime rate goes down, as Texas saw between 2009 and 2014. They reduced the prison population by 11%. And the crime rate went down by over 20%. So this bill is very solid. It's been tested in the states over time for over a decade, and I do not foresee any problems with this bill.
Amisha, how did it overcome the Willie Horton bar?
That's a very difficult question. Partially, I think that it overcame the Willie Horton bar because you had so many people from both sides of the aisle who were advocating at the state level and had been advocating at the state level from start. Partially, I would also argue that this bill went through multiple iterations. There were parts in its initial phases that people had significant questions about. And by the time that it got to national recognition, to where, people were talking about it in governor's offices across the state, people were talking about how it was going to affect county level government and what measures they were going to have to now take. I think that helped them to avoid that. One, because to be honest, a lot of the issues around the sentencing didn't necessarily affect or didn't go into effect of public safety. What they were looking at was largely people who had been incarcerated again due to over-sentencing of drug crimes. And the majority, and people feel bad. You think that now you can look at those who have been in jail for the past 30, 40 years, and folks look at them and they say, you were arrested when you were 17 years old. Your life has been spent behind bars. You've missed out on so much of everything that has happened across this country. And they believe in second chances.
So, Ronnie, in terms of the president was not always on board, Pelosi was not always on board, Jared Kushner was always an advocate of pushing this criminal reform. How did they get the president on board?
Well, that's a great question, and I think Jared Kushner's role in this was absolutely central, and it was absolutely essential. The president trusted his son-in-law to speak with him and to be candid about the bill, and ultimately that's what enabled the president to overcome this. And also, quite candidly, once the FOP and other law enforcement groups like the National District Attorneys Association got on board with the bill, that enabled the president to be in a place where he's more comfortable supporting the bill. So it was a combination of factors, but certainly Jared Kushner's role was huge and monumental in ensuring that this bill got the president's support and ensuring that this bill actually passed.
I would agree with all that, and I think that we also have to make sure we give credit to the president, right? Because we don't see executives in states, we don't see presidents tackling issues of this magnitude in the first term, right? It just doesn't happen. We have a president here who's pardoning people, who's granting clemency, and who decided that he's going to create a pathway to get people the dignity of work, to get their dignity back, to rebuild themselves, and to have a real second chance. And that takes a lot of courage, right? Look around the country and see how many governors are tackling this a year and a half in, and you're just not going to see that many. And I'll tell you, I had the pleasure of being in the Oval Office when it was signed and chatting with the president, and he believes it, right? He believes in it, from what I could tell. But Jared Kushner and Ivanka, they really led this. Brooke Rollins in Jared Kushner's office was a huge piece of that.
I can't thank you soldiers enough for your rallying legislators behind the scene. That was important also. I want to thank all our guests and our team here at WGLA 24/7. I'm Armstrong Williams. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. The Criminal Justice Reform Bill has passed. Misha Cross, John Kufos, and Ronnie Lambert are here to tell us the significance of it and what families need to do immediately who are impacted by it.
One of the things that families need to do immediately is to continue to raise awareness, specifically because this bill was passed and it was passed so close to the winter holiday, to Christmas. There are a lot of folks who followed the process, but weren't necessarily, they were driven away by other media stories. So we want to make sure that people still understand what this impact is. In addition to continuing to tell their stories, recognizing that this legislation will affect and has affected people of all walks of life, people of all backgrounds, religions, and making sure that it really gets the credit that it deserves, because this is probably the most, definitely in my time, monumental piece of federal legislation that has come out.
Ronnie, it is law. It's the law of the land.
It is. It's remarkable. Thinking about where we started and how far it has come and how long it would, and the journey that it took to get the bill actually passed, and then we had that hold up in the Senate for a little bit, and ultimately the bill passes. It's remarkable. The bipartisan support here, again, cannot be understated, and it can't be undersold. In a time where it seems there are two sides to every issue and there's serious and severe polarization, this was one issue where Congress really came together and worked with the president and got something done.
You think it bodes well that we can see both houses coming together with more significant legislation like this, John Kuko?
Oh, absolutely. And one of the things, other immediate steps, by the way, families should contact the Bureau of Prisons Sentence Designation and Computation Center in Grand Prairie, Texas. That is the center that, number one, is going to calculate their good time, and number two, can help them perhaps be transferred closer to home, right? That's where that decision is going to be made out of Grand Prairie, Texas. But yeah, seeing the bipartisan support, it's nice to see everyone get together to do the right thing.
The right thing, the honest thing, the moral thing. Thank you all so much for joining us. That's it for this edition of After the Show with your host, Armstrong Williams.